The idea that hell exists makes absolutely no sense to me. Why would a loving God create a torture chamber that he sends people to? And what possible finite crime could justify infinite punishments in this literal hellhole? It doesn't make any moral sense, and it really just sounds like a boogeyman story to scare people away from questioning their religious beliefs.
Yeah, admittedly, hell is a really hard doctrine to swallow, even for many Christians. In fact, it's one of the most commonly cited reasons why people who were raised Christian end up abandoning Christianity. If even Christians struggle with the idea of God sending people to hell, it's no wonder that this atheist TikToker has trouble making sense of it. But let's see if we can bring some clarity here. The first objection raised has to do with the alleged incompatibility between God's love and God subjecting people to torture. It doesn't seem very loving to intentionally make someone experience pain and suffering, does it? What can we say about this? Well, at the outset, I think it's important to remember that the classical conception of God is a being who is not only perfectly loving, but also perfectly just. In order for the demands of justice to be met, crimes can't go unpunished, no matter how much we love the person being punished. Imagine a case in which a court judge has to sentence her son to prison for a crime he committed. Yes, this can't actually happen in our legal system, but just humor me. The judge knows what her son will experience in prison: boredom, discomfort, harassment, potentially even rape. The judge loves her son and can't bear the thought of letting him experience these things, much less being the one who has to sentence him to this fate. But the judge knows that her son committed a crime and deserves to go to prison, so reluctantly she does the right thing. Would we say that such a mother doesn't love her son? Of course not. What this thought experiment shows is that when we consider all the details, there's no incompatibility between loving someone and subjecting them to the punishment they rightly deserve. Okay, fine, you might say, but when it comes to hell, we're not talking about prison, we're talking about burning in a literal fire. If anything can be called a cruel and unusual punishment, surely this would be it. Well, don't be so sure. While it's true that the most common description of hell in the Bible is fire, there are good reasons to think that this is just metaphorical. The origin of the fire imagery relates to the Greek word for hell, Gehenna. This word is a transliteration of the Hebrew word Gehinnom, which refers to the valley of Hinnom located close to Jerusalem. Historically, this was a place where Israelites burned child sacrifices to the Canaanite god Molech, and later became a place for burning trash. Additionally, the prophet Jeremiah said that the valley of Hinnom would be called the Valley of Slaughter because of all the Judeans who would be killed and thrown there by the Babylonians. The prophet Isaiah said that it will be a funeral pyre for the kingdom of Assyria. As the idea of a future punishment of all the wicked developed later in Jewish theology, it's not too surprising given the historic associations of the Valley of Hinnom with death and fire that Jews would pick up this fire imagery to describe hell, and that the New Testament authors would continue this tradition. Secondly, fire isn't the only image used to describe hell. In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says that the wicked will be thrown into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So if you take all of the Bible's descriptions of hell literally, you get a contradiction, because hell can't be a sea of flames and a place of darkness at the same time. In other words, these are probably just metaphors for describing the anguish people will experience in hell, which could, in all possibility, be entirely psychological in nature. Alright. We get it. We don't know what hell is actually like. But one thing we do know is that the Bible says it'll last forever. No matter what the crime is, that's a bit cruel, don't you think? Or, as the TikTok video puts it, what finite crime could justify infinite punishment? Yeah, I admit that's a tough one, but there are actually many ways that Christians have tried to answer this objection. One way might be to suggest that people don't get sent to hell for sins like theft or murder. Rather, the main sin they're being punished for is sticking a middle finger to God, which can be thought of as a crime of infinite proportion. Although our legal system sentences criminals the same way no matter who the victim is, morally speaking, we can think of cases where the severity of a person's wrongdoing changes with who they've wronged. For example, a man who hits his mother does something far worse than a man who hits another man in a bar fight. So plausibly, since God is our creator and sustainer, and an infinitely perfect being who is worthy of worship, anyone who raises a middle finger against him is deserving of infinite punishment. Another suggestion would be that because people don't stop sinning in hell, they continue to rack up more and more punishment. So it's not the case that people in hell receive infinite punishment for finite crimes. Rather, they receive infinite punishment for infinite crimes. If you're willing to go a little outside of Protestant orthodoxy, there are also alternative models of hell that don't affirm eternal conscious torment. For example, in the book 4 Views on Hell published by Zondervan, John Stackhouse, a professor of religious studies at Crandall University, defends annihilationism, which says that unrepentant sinners will receive punishment proportional to their sins on earth and then vanish from existence. Robin Parry, a British theologian, defends universalism, which says that everyone is redeemed by Christ's atoning death and will eventually go to heaven. And last but not least, Jerry Walls, a professor of philosophy at Houston Baptist University, defends the view that those in hell have the option of repenting and being gradually sanctified in purgatory before eventually going to heaven. These aren't fringe views put forward by heretics engaging in exhibitions of self-delusion or wishful thinking. These are bona fide academics who make serious arguments using biblical exegesis, Christian tradition, and philosophical reflection. If you don't think eternal conscious torment works, maybe you should consider some of these other models of hell. The last point I wanted to address from the TikTok video is the suggestion that hell was made up to scare people into retaining their religious beliefs. Admittedly, this has a ring of plausibility to it. I've encountered enough testimonies from Christian deconverts to know that the residual fear of hell from their childhood education often leaves them with severe emotional trauma, even to the point of needing therapy to overcome it. If hell has that much of an effect on people, it's not surprising that some people think it was invented to be used as a means of social control. But I want to respond here with 2 points. First, if our TikToker wants to argue that hell doesn't exist because people only believe in it as the product of emotional manipulation, then he would be committing the genetic fallacy. This line of reasoning is fallacious because attacking the source of one's belief only undercuts one's justification for that belief. It's not enough to falsify it. For example, let's say that the only reason I believe today will rain is because I flipped a coin. Obviously, that's a really bad reason for believing it'll rain. But does that mean that it won't rain today? Of course not. It very well may. Similarly, even if belief in hell is just a product of emotional manipulation, it may still be the case that hell exists. This brings me to my second point. Is it true that hell was just invented so that Christians wouldn't apostatize? Even from a purely historical point of view, it seems like the answer is no. As I alluded to earlier, the Christian concept of hell was borrowed directly from Judaism. So the question is, how did the doctrine of hell arise in Judaism? Early Jewish views of the afterlife mostly involved a kind of dark, gloomy existence in a place under the earth where dead souls go after they die. It was thought that both the righteous and unrighteous will live eternally as shadowy beings in this underworld called Sheol in Hebrew and Hades in Greek, with neither rewards nor punishments for things done in their earthly lives. However, after the Jews were conquered and exiled by Babylon, there began to be theological developments that led to belief in a future bodily resurrection and reward for remaining faithful to God in the face of persecution. By the intertestamental period, belief in a future resurrection became widespread, as reflected in many Jewish writings at the time, like 2nd Maccabees. Simultaneously, there developed a number of views about the fate of the wicked, each imagining a kind of punishment for sins that went unpunished during their lifetimes, especially for those who persecuted Jews. The picture we have here doesn't look like Jews invented hell to scare people to remain obedient to God. If anything, the motivation was the opposite. Jews who remained loyal to God in the face of persecution were promised the reward of being resurrected into a new, wonderful life. Rather, belief in the punishment of the wicked in the afterlife was probably motivated by the desire for divine retribution against Israel's enemies, and faith in God's justice against those who died without receiving their just deserts. This is most clearly seen in 1st Enoch, which suggests that nothing will happen to those who have already been punished for their sins in their earthly lives. All this to say, historically speaking, the idea that Christians invented hell to scare people into becoming or remaining Christians doesn't hold water. Now at this point, I should point out that my only goal in this video was to respond to this TikToker's arguments against hell. I haven't said anything about why anyone should believe in hell, and the reason for that is because ultimately, I think that requires an argument for the inspiration and inerrancy of the Bible, which itself hinges on establishing Jesus' divinity and resurrection. Don't get me wrong, I do think a good case can be made for these things, and I'll probably get to it eventually. But for now, if you're rejecting Christianity because you think hell is unjust, I really hope you'll give it some more thought.